Welcome to the expansion and relocation history of the Western Hockey League, the WHL. The WHL would form in 1966 under its initial name, the Canadian Major Junior Hockey League. The ball got rolling after the Edmonton Oil Kings won the 1966 Memorial Cup, and the Oil Kings owner was concerned about the dilution of junior hockey in Western Canada. The Oil Kings owner felt the level of play in the AJHL was too low and instead registered the Oil Kings for an Alberta Senior League. The Canadian Amateur Hockey Association informed the Oil Kings they'd be ineligible for the Memorial Cup. Edmonton and Calgary took 5 teams from the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League to form a new league. The CMJHL name was originally chosen to keep open the possibility of Eastern teams joining. After the first year, the league would be renamed the Western Canada Junior Hockey League, and after the second year, the league name would be shortened to the Western Canada Hockey League. Then 10 years after that, the league name would be shortened once again to the Western Hockey League. The original 7 of the CMJHL in 1966 were the Calgary Buffaloes, Edmonton Oil Kings, Estevan Bruins, Moose Jaw Canucks, Regina Pats, Saskatoon Blades, who are the only franchise to be in every season of the WHL unchanged, and finally the Weyburn Red Wings. Here's the inaugural 66-67 season with the original 7. After year 1, the Swift Current Broncos would be added to the league. Interestingly, the population statistics in 1967 showed that Swift Current had a population of only 12,000, Weyburn only 9,000, and Estevan only 7,700. Swift Current was attractive as they drew crowds of 4,000 when they played exhibition games against then-current CMJHL teams during that season. The Canadian Major Junior Hockey League would be renamed after 1 year, the Western Canada Junior Hockey League. The WCJHL name complied with the wishes of the Canadian Amateur Hockey Association as the league and CAHA reconciled after the league operated independently in its first season. The Calgary Buffaloes would be rebranded the Calgary Centennials, adopting Bobby Gimby's Canada as its official theme song. They would continue wearing traditional Calgary red and white. Flin Flon agreed to give the Manitoba Amateur Hockey Association an annual assessment of $1,000 plus 5% of the WCJHL playoff gate. The Winnipeg Jets were also added in '67. Winnipeg had to agree to similar conditions as Flin Flon with Maha. That put the pressure on the Brandon Wheat Kings. Brandon felt it had to join the WCJHL if hockey is to survive in the city. Here is the 11-team configuration of the WCJHL in '67-68, with Brandon, Flin Flon, Swift Current, and Winnipeg added. After the second year, the name of the league would be shortened to the Western Canada Hockey League, the WCHL, in '68. The Regina Pats would leave in '68 and join the new SJHL since the WCHL was breaking off from CAHA, which would impact Regina's subsidy from the NHL and Memorial Cup eligibility. The Weyburn Red Wings would leave for the same reason, to join the new SJHL since the WCHL was breaking off from CAHA. Meanwhile, the Moose Jaw Canucks were kicked out. Moose Jaw was booted for a failure to comply with the league's financial regulations. A $1,000 check bounced as the Canucks were $31,000 in the hole. CAHA offered the Canucks financial assistance if they abandoned the independent WCHL. The WCHL was down to 8 franchises in '68-69 and '69-70. The Medicine Hat Tigers would join the league in 1970. Medicine Hat had a 26,000 population in 1970. They've surpassed 63,000 today. Meanwhile, the Regina Pats would return to the league after a quick excursion. The Pats would return to the WCHL and are the oldest continuously operated junior hockey team in the world, originating in 1917. The WCHL was up to 10 in '70-71 with Medicine Hat and Regina in the league. The Estevan Bruins would relocate in 1971. Of course, Estevan's 1971 population was 9,000. They would become the New Westminster Bruins, as New Westminster's 1971 population was 42,000. The Victoria Cougars would join the league in 1971. The WCHL was enthusiastic about expansion into British Columbia. Another British Columbia franchise would join in the Vancouver Gnats. The Vancouver Gnats were named after the Hamburger King, Nat Bailey. The WCHL would be up to 12 franchises in 71-72, with the British Columbia trio of Vancouver, Victoria, and New Westminster now in the league. The WCHL would be evenly divided with 3 franchises in each of the 4 provinces. That would continue for 2 years until the Vancouver Gnats would relocate in 1973. The Gnats played to an almost empty house at Vancouver's Pacific Coliseum. They would relocate to Kamloops and become the Kamloops Chiefs. The Winnipeg Jets would rebrand themselves the Winnipeg Clubs in 73. The name changed with the WHA Jets starting up in 72. Here's the 12-team WCHL in 73-74 with the team now in Kamloops. The Swift Current Broncos would relocate in 74. They had 2,000 attendants and operating costs had skyrocketed by 30%. They were $35,000 short of operating expenses. Swift Current would relocate to Lethbridge. The Broncos would play at the 5,000-seat Lethbridge Sportsplex opening in 1974. Lethbridge had a population of about 50,000. The 12-team WCHL in 74-75 now has a franchise in Lethbridge. These 12 would be the same for 2 years until the Edmonton Oil Kings would relocate in 76. They were paying $3,500 per game in rent. Edmonton explored Portland, Spokane, and Vancouver for relocation, all while the Calgary Centennials were exploring Seattle and Spokane for relocation, and the Winnipeg Monarchs were exploring Thunder Bay, Prince Albert, and Spokane for relocation. The Oil Kings would end up in Portland as the Portland Winterhawks. CAHA adopted legislation at its annual meeting to allow American-based but Canadian-owned teams to compete for the Memorial Cup. The Winnipeg Clubs would be rebranded as the Winnipeg Monarchs in 76 after a deal to relocate to Spokane fell through. The 12-team WCHL in 76-77 would have its first American franchise in the Portland Winterhawks. The Kamloops Chiefs would relocate in 77 after heavy financial losses and trouble drawing attendance. They would become the Seattle Breakers. It was rumored the NHL would put a team in Seattle, but that didn't happen. The Calgary Centennials would also relocate in 77. The Centennials played second fiddle in the arena and paid 30% of gate for rent. They would relocate to Billings, Montana and become the Billings Bighorns. Billings averaged 3,000 attendants in the Southwest Hockey League. The Bighorns would play in an 8,600-seat, 15-month-old arena. The Winnipeg Monarchs would finally relocate in 77 after an unsuccessful attempt to relocate to Spokane before last season. The Monarchs had trouble breaking 1,000 in attendance. They would become the Calgary Wranglers after a new investor group bought the Winnipeg Monarchs after Calgary had lost the Centennials. In summary, the Chaos of 77 relocated the Kamloops Chiefs to Seattle to become the Seattle Breakers, the Calgary Centennials to Billings to become the Billings Bighorns, and the Winnipeg Monarchs to Calgary to become the Calgary Wranglers. 12-team WCHL in 77-78 would now have 3 American franchises, with one in Washington, one in Oregon, and one in Montana. In 78, the Western Canada Hockey League would shorten its name to the Western Hockey League, the WHL we know today. The Flin Flon Bombers would relocate in 78 as the 2,000-seat Whitney Forum was no longer financially viable. The Flin Flon Bombers had an attendance average of 1,091. The Flin Flon Bombers would end up in Edmonton after a sale to Winnipeg fell through in August. The WHL in 78-79 would see the next version of the Edmonton Oil Kings. But that version would only last 1 year as the Edmonton Oil Kings would relocate in 79. The Oil Kings lost $100,000 in less than 8 months. They would relocate to Great Falls, Montana, where they could play in the brand new Four Seasons Arena. The 12-team WHL in 79-80 would now have the Great Falls Americans and more teams in Montana than in Manitoba. In fact, the number of teams in Montana would equal the number of teams in Saskatchewan and British Columbia. But the Great Falls Americans wouldn't even make it to Christmas as they folded just 28 games into the WHL 72-game season on December 16, 1979, after an average of 523 attendance. The dormant franchise would later be resurrected as the Spokane Flyers. That took only a matter of months, as the Spokane Flyers would start play in 1980. The Winnipeg Warriors were granted an expansion franchise after the relocation of the new Westminster Bruins fell through. The WHL was now up to 13 for 80-81, with teams in Spokane and Winnipeg. After an attempt to relocate the new Westminster Bruins failed the previous season, the new Westminster Bruins would finally relocate in 81. Kamloops, Lloydminster, and Grand Prairie were explored as relocation sites, and they would end up in Kamloops as the Kamloops Junior Oilers. The franchise was purchased by Edmonton Oilers owner Peter Pocklington. The 13-team WHL in 81-82 would now have a team in Kamloops. The Spokane Flyers would fold in the 81-82 season. The Flyers folded just 26 games into the WHL 72-game season on December 2, 1981, beating out the previous incarnation of the Great Falls Americans by 2 weeks, as the Great Falls Americans folded 28 games into the 79-80 season on December 16 of 79. The team bus of the Flyers would be sold to the Victoria Cougars. However, the Victoria owners would not pay the fees required to bring the bus into Canada, so they traded Spokane's bus to the Seattle Breakers for holdout Tom Martin on December 19, 1983. In incredible irony, all three NHL teams Tom Martin played for, the Jets, Whalers, and North Stars, would also relocate. Much like that Spokane Flyers bus he was traded for. Prince Albert Raiders would be added as an expansion franchise in 82. The Billings Bighorns would relocate. The owner cited rising costs and ripped the quality of junior hockey when selling the team. The team would be sold for $300,000 and become the Nanaimo Islanders. The Kelowna Wings would be granted an expansion franchise despite a battle with the city council over whether they'd play in downtown Memorial Arena or the 1,200-seat Rutland Arena. The WHL would be up to 14 teams in 82-83, with teams in Kelowna, Nanaimo, and Prince Albert. The Nanaimo Islanders would relocate in 83, lasting only one season after a local effort to buy the team fell short. The Seattle Breakers owner contacted the Nanaimo group to inform them it would be cheaper to buy the Breakers than to buy the Islanders for $350,000. So the Nanaimo Islanders would become the new Westminster Bruins. This would be the second iteration of the new Westminster Bruins. The 14-team WHL in 83-84 would now have a team in New Westminster. The Kamloops Junior Oilers would rebrand themselves the Kamloops Blazers in 84. The Winnipeg Warriors would relocate. They needed 3,000 attendants to break even, but averaged only 1,878 in a 15,000-seat arena. They would relocate to Moose Jaw, becoming the Moose Jaw Warriors. Moose Jaw was awarded an expansion franchise last summer, but pivoted to buying Winnipeg's franchise when it became available. The 14-team WHL in 84-85 would now have a franchise in Moose Jaw. The Kelowna Wings would relocate in 85. The Kelowna Wings lost $40,000 in their final year and had been losing money for 3 seasons. They would relocate to Spokane and become the Spokane Chiefs. The WHL would return to Spokane after the Spokane Flyers folded in December of 81. Meanwhile, the Seattle Breakers would be renamed the Seattle Thunderbirds. They were rebranded after being sold. The Seattle Breakers had lost $500,000 over the past 6 seasons. Here's the 14-team configuration in 85-86 with a franchise now in Spokane. The Lethbridge Broncos would relocate in 86, and there were rumors swirling around both Edmonton and Swift Current. Ultimately, the Broncos ended up in Swift Current instead of Edmonton. The Broncos would return to Swift Current after leaving Swift Current for Lethbridge 12 years earlier at 74. Here's the 14-team WHL in 86-87 with the return of Swift Current. The Calgary Wranglers would relocate in 87. Attendance fell well below the 2,500 average needed to break even. They would morph into the Lethbridge Hurricanes as the WHL would return to Lethbridge after a 1-year absence. Here's the 14 franchise configuration of the WHL in 87-88 with the return of Lethbridge. The new Westminster Bruins would relocate in 88. The owner was building a 6,000-seat rink in the Tri-Cities and already had over 2,500 committed season tickets. They would become the Tri-City Americans, and the Tri-City Americans survived a string of owners in the early 2000s trying to relocate the team to Canada. The WHL even blocked one owner from moving the team to Chilliwack in 2004. Here's the 14-team WHL in 88-89, 89-90, and 90-91 with the Tri-City Americans on board. The Tacoma Rockets would be added in 91. This would be Tacoma's first hockey team since 1952. An expansion franchise would be playing in the Tacoma Dome, where they twice drew 15,000 attendants hosting the Seattle Thunderbirds. The WHL is up to 15 in 91-92 with the addition of Tacoma. The Red Deer Rebels would be added to the league in 92. Rebels won the team name contest over the Centurions and Renegades. The WHL is now up to 16 in 92-93 with the addition of Red Deer. They would hold the same 16 in 93-94 until the Victoria Cougars would relocate. The lack of corporate sponsorships was a factor, as most were headquartered in Vancouver. They would relocate to Prince George, becoming the Prince George Cougars. Prince George would be the northernmost franchise and would have a 5,300-seat arena opening in December of 95. The 16-team WHL would now have a team in Prince George in 94-95. The Tacoma Rockets would relocate in 95. The 22,000-seat Tacoma Dome had bad sightlines for hockey, with risers too shallow, and booking playoff dates proved to be difficult. The Rockets would move to Kelowna, where there were plans for a new arena. The Calgary Hitmen would join the league in 95. The name, logo, and colors paid homage to owner Brett the Hitman Hart, who was around the peak of his career back then. The logo was originally deemed too controversial for being too violent and was temporarily scrapped in fear of losing corporate sponsorships. Here's the 17-team configuration of the WHL 95-96 with the Kelowna Rockets and Calgary Hitmen. Edmonton would become the 18th franchise in 96. And the WHL would be up to 18 in 96-97 and 97-98 with Edmonton on board. Edmonton would relocate after only 2 seasons in 98. They lost over 200,000 each season and averaged 2,200 attendance in a 3,900-seat arena, while averaging 5,200 attendance in Northlands Coliseum. The problem with Northlands Coliseum was the revenue sharing from things such as luxury boxes and board advertising. They would relocate to Kootenay, where Kootenay pre-sold 1,600 season tickets. Here's the 18-team configuration of the WHL 98-99, 99-2000, and 2000-2001, with Kootenay now in the league. The Vancouver Giants would be added in 2001. The name Giants was chosen over Millionaires and Metropolitans. They decided on a Johnny Canuck lumberjack figure lugging a hockey stick, with the owner quoted, "We like Millionaires for nostalgic reasons, but we just couldn't see guys skating around the ice with dollar signs on their jerseys. Metropolitans had some merit with the Vancouver skyline, but it didn't stand out. Giants is very simple." Here's the 19-team WHL in 01-02 with Vancouver now in the league. There would be no changes in 02-03. The Everett Silvertips would be added in 2003. The Seattle Thunderbirds owner was given right of first refusal to own the franchise since Everett infringed on Seattle's territory. Everett would be the 20th franchise, and they would play in a brand new $72 million, 8,300-seat arena. The WHL would now be up to 20 franchises in 03-04, 04-05, and 05-06 with the addition of Everett. The Chilliwack Bruins would join in 2006. The WHL blocked the Tri-City Americans' attempted relocation to Chilliwack in 2005 after 4 U.S. franchises argued Tri-City moving would put a strain on their franchises. The WHL would grant Chilliwack an expansion franchises in 2006. Chilliwack would bring the WHL up to 21 in 06-07. Edmonton Oil Kings would join in 2007. The Oilers saw the success of the Calgary Hitmen and Vancouver Giants and put out an open offer of $5 million for any WHL franchise in 2004. The WHL then granted Edmonton the 22nd franchise for 2007. And the WHL is now up to 22 teams in 07-08, 08-09, 09-10, and 10-11 with another iteration of the Edmonton Oil Kings. Chilliwack would relocate in 2011. Chilliwack of the WHL and Abbotsford of the AHL split potential fans as Chilliwack averaged 3,300 attendance and Abbotsford averaged 3,600 attendance. They would move to Victoria, becoming the Victoria Royals. The team was sold for between 7 and 8 million. There was now better corporate sponsorship in Victoria than 17 years ago when the Cougars left, as some companies headquartered in Vancouver then had now moved to Victoria. The WHL now, with a team in Victoria and at 22 franchises overall, would see its longest period of stability with no changes for 8 years, until 2019 when Kootenay would relocate. They had a league-low 2,218 average attendance at the time of the announcement. Kootenay would relocate to Winnipeg. Winnipeg sold over 1,000 season tickets in less than 24 hours. They increased capacity of the 1,400-seat arena to 1,600 by adding a balcony, and there were plans to build a new 4,500-seat arena. With a franchise in Winnipeg, the WHL would have no changes over the next 4 years, when Winnipeg would relocate in 2023. Building a new arena was a league-mandated condition of relocating the franchise to Winnipeg in 2019, but plans to build a new 4,500-seat arena fell through. Winnipeg would relocate to Wenatchee and become the Wenatchee Wild. A 4,300-seat arena had opened in 2008, and Wenatchee would be the 6th U.S. franchise in the 22-team league. That leaves the 22-team WHL today with 16 in Canada and 6 in the U.S. Of the 16 in Canada, 1 is in Manitoba, 5 are in Saskatchewan, 5 are in Alberta, and 5 are in British Columbia. While in the U.S., 5 are in Washington and 1 is in Oregon.